Hello and welcome to episode 2 of this podcast. You guys haven't heard the name of it yet. I'm calling it Wicked History, which is so
Ooh.
dorky, but I love it. So cheesy. And this is a Maine public history podcast. As usual, I am your host, Dana Ricker, and today I am joined by the amazing
Catherine Sear, who is the Associate Curator at Maine Maritime Museum.
Selena McGonnell, collection specialist, soon to be registrar.
Perfect. Yay. Awesome. Oh my gosh, this is so great. So last episode, we were also lucky enough to have Antonella from the Abbey Museum talking about visitor services and Maine Wabanaki heritage here. And this episode, Catherine and Selena are so amazing and joining us from the Maine Maritime Museum. And they are going to talk to us about the process of curating and cataloging collections, as well as kind of touching on some of the like maritime history that has really been at the core of like a lot of Maine culture. So we're so lucky to have them, Catherine and Selena. I've said it probably 17 times at this point, but I will say it one more time. Thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate you guys being here. Okay, so starting her off. I guess honestly, could you guys just describe a bit of your own personal backgrounds and how you kind of got involved with museum curation and collections?
Yeah.
Sure, I'll go first. So I started out actually doing a history education in undergrad and then studied abroad. And I went to an amazing exhibit at the British Museum, as one does, and thought, dang, I really wish that I could have done this and curated this. And that's just kind of how it started. I switched my major to public history and then did my master's program at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and then co-curated a couple of exhibits and did a couple of internships in collections management and exhibit development.
That makes my college experience seem so boring in comparison. Oh my goodness. I say that I did actually study abroad too. I was in England. What school were you at?
Sunderland University up in the north.
Yeah. I know where that is. My husband's a very big soccer fan, so I know where Sunderland
there you
is.
go. There you go.
But we actually, how I met my husband was studying abroad in Winchester, England. So
Okay.
that's that. Yeah. What about you?
So I am a born and raised Mainer. I was born at the very top of the state, grew up in the western part, and then ended up on the coast for my undergrad at Bowdoin College, where I was able to connect with some incredible mentors and individuals who helped take little old me who thought, I want to be a museum curator someday, and really helped make it a reality. So again, through internships, through various institutions, both here in Maine and throughout New England, I graduated, started working at Pajebscott History Center in Brunswick, focusing on the history of Brunswick, Topsom, and Harpswell, managing 2 historic house museums, doing all the things as one does in a small history museum with 2 employees, and then went off to grad school in Delaware, where I trained specifically as a material culturist and decorative arts scholar through the Winchester program in American material culture. And it was there that I really honed in on Maine history, Maine-made objects, and architecture, knowing that I wanted to come back to my home state and be a part of the history making here, but also the history telling. And was lucky enough to take a position here at Maine Maritime directly after I graduated, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. And it's so fun that you got to like you started in Maine, you're born in Maine, and you get to kind of like come back and then like retell that story. That's so cool.
Exactly.
I feel like especially with also like curation and cataloging, when people think of like history majors, it's either you're going to be a history teacher or you're going to do that, but people like have no idea what like all is actually involved in curation and collecting and how you do that. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about like the process of acquiring and cataloging artifacts for specifically with the Maine Maritime Museum's collection?
Sure. So yeah, I can tackle acquiring and sort of how we get objects into the collection, and then I'll turn it over to Selena, who can talk about cataloging, as that's been a big part of her work here at the museum. But in terms of acquiring materials, most of the times it's through donation. So it is somebody contacting us saying, I have X object. So let's say I have a half hull, which we have many in the museum's collection, of such and such vessel. We ask that they provide us with all of the information that they have. Gaining any sort of provenance, i.e. the history of an object, is really important for us, because really that's what's important. Like, the object can, to an extent, speak for itself, but it's the history and the story behind it that really allows us then to take it a step further and be able to create exhibitions and do interpretation that is meaningful and impactful for visitors. So, like I said, most of the times it is through donations, and they can come from somebody who lives here in Bath, or they can come from somebody who's out in California who has some sort of familial ties to the region, or maybe worked on a tall ship when they were in college or high school in like the 70s or 80s. So it really runs the gamut. I would say, it can be like once a week we have somebody contact us about a donation, or sometimes more frequently or less frequently. It kind of comes in spurts.
Yeah.
And so then we have an interior committee made up of members of the curatorial department, as well as our education staff and our executive director. It's called an acquisitions committee. It can be called a collections committee in other institutions. But we then take all of the offers that we have been given, and we think critically about what are the holes in our collection. Does this fill something new, or a story that we have wanted to tell? Do we have 500 others of them? If so, are we the best home for it? We have about 5% of our collection on display at any given time. So that's 95% that lives in collection storage. And we are not unique as other institutions.
Yeah.
We're bursting. Like, we are full. Selena can very much attest to that. And so we have to think critically about what we are adding to the collection, and then does it help us fulfill our mission and fulfill the goals? And so we are driven by a collections policy that has helped identify sort of the holes in our collection thus far. And we try to stick to that to be able to make sure that we are making smart choices. Yeah. And so I also want to say, in addition to donations, we do go out and seek objects sometimes. There are local auction houses that we do follow, and occasionally we will purchase from them after doing research and whatnot. But by large and far, we are getting donations, and that is how we are adding to the collection. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, Selena, as soon as they fall into your hands, your magical hands, what do you do?
I catalog them. So cataloging, we have to follow a process called the CCO guidelines, the cataloging for cultural objects. And cataloging is really just recording just all the detailed information, just recording absolutely everything that we can about the object, like regarding like the provenance behind it, some context if we can, or if like physical observations, anything that's in the accession records if we have them. Any related documentation and all the research we can just overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually start, at least for me, I start with digitizing the object, because that is one of the biggest parts of having a collection these days, especially right now. Accessibility is so important. Right. So I usually digitize first, and I also do the handling and the physical observations while I can, since handling it, we like to limit the handling as much as we can. So if I can do all of that all at once, all the better.
Yeah.
And let's see, and that would also help with doing the condition reports as well. So,
I'm so glad you brought up the digitizing part, because in this class that we're in, like, that has been a huge portion of it is talking about digitization, and also like you said, like the accessibility, and also if it's accessible online, who is that really accessible for, and things like that. And that's I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a very important topic that I'm really glad we got to touch on for this. Okay, so you talk a little bit about handling and storing delicate and sensitive items. Besides just making sure that you're handling it as little as possible, what else do you kind of consider when you're thinking about preserving and conserving, specifically kind of the Maine maritime themed artifacts that you guys deal with?
Well, preservation just really is actions to prevent damage and minimize deterioration. Yeah, deterioration, that's the word.
Friday.
English is hard.
Words are hard.
Yeah.
So it's really just what we do on a general regular basis, just keeping track of the condition and writing it down in the condition reports. Just general good handling practices and storage practices. Yeah, and as for conservation, we have museum funds to outsource the conservation.
Oh, okay, so it's not necessarily in-house. It's
that requires super specific training that I personally don't have.
That we don't have on staff, and so we are lucky enough that we have a handful of local conservators that we are able to utilize, which is really helpful, especially Maine is considered a rural state, and the fact that we have so many talented individuals nearby is a real benefit to us, and we find it very important to utilize their skills. So one of the thing I want to make my case about handling is I want to see, I know it's like my soapbox stand.
Please
No more white cotton gloves.
Yes.
No more white cotton gloves.
No,
really?
no,
Why?
No. Okay. So
I feel like you need a microphone right here.
Right? Exactly. So there's a whole lot of things, but I feel like sometimes you see the age-old photos of people holding an object and they're wearing these cotton gloves.
Yeah.
The reality is cotton gloves are actually really bad for a variety of reasons.
I'm actually so shocked right now. I did not know this.
Your best thing to do in most cases is clean bare hands, especially with paper objects, because when you are wearing a glove, and especially a cotton glove, you lose some of the tactile elements and being able to feel, and how you're gauging like a turning of a page or flipping something. You actually have a little less control. And then the biggest thing about cotton gloves is that you leave fibers. So you are actually leaving elements on an object.
Yeah.
And especially metal objects, you can actually scratch the surface. So I'm thinking like holding like a teapot, like a metal teapot or something, like pewter or silver. You are actually causing abrasions when you wear white cotton gloves. So in those cases, when you're touching metal, you want to use like a latex or latex-free nitrate glove.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, the archivist at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire very much is going to be shook by hearing this, because that is where I did my undergrad. And when we would go to the archives, he was like, cotton gloves, cotton gloves, cotton gloves all around.
No. So I know it's going to be a learning curve. And, I've even had people be like, why aren't, I've had objects in my hand. Why aren't you wearing gloves? And then it provides this opportunity to educate. Mm-hmm. And so, clean, dry hands are your best tool, because gloves provide a false sense of security. And at the end of the day, that you're just going to think you're more prepared.
Yeah.
When in reality, you can be, and that's why like the cotton gloves don't fit to your hands.
Yeah.
So the nitrate latex versions do. Mm-hmm. Like I have to wear. I'm a tiny person, so I wear small gloves, but they fit nice and tight. There's no room for me to accidentally have like part of the fingertip that's going to catch on something or anything. Yeah. So I'm not saying no to gloves. I'm just saying no to white cotton gloves. That's my soapbox.
And handling practices can change over time.
And
Like
it
that's
has.
new.
That's
Right. Well, relatively new.
It's exactly like for years we thought cotton gloves were the best thing.
Right.
But as we began to do more research and
more
analysis of objects and like science has really come into the play of that. But it's yeah, I think people are shocked when you hear
everyone's just always thinking, oh, your hands have so much oil on them, your hands are so oily, like it's gonna leave oil things. But it's like, I guess if you just clean them beforehand, like
exactly,
that makes I'll title this episode, instead of like curation and collections, it's just
gloves.
no white cotton gloves.
So yeah,
perfect.
So that's my, like, if I can get that into museums and the public's head, I go, my life purpose.
The one take home.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, I'm glad you brought that up, because my next thought that I was going to have was, you kind of talked about just in general, like having the white cotton gloves with like documents and things, but I know you guys also get very unique objects being like a maritime based museum. Are there any like unique, this is going to be mostly a question for Selena as far as care, and then Catherine as far as like obtaining them, but like with the maritime artifacts, are there any like unique challenges in like curating and collecting like those? I went to the Maine Maritime Museum with my parents this summer, actually, which is how I got the idea to like have this interview, and they loved it. My dad was so into it, and when we went to the boat building barn thing, loved it. But there's like huge artifacts that you guys have. Like, is there any like special consideration that you guys have to take that other museums probably don't?
I mean, boats and vessels, like in general, like take a different level of care. That is certainly the case, and we are really lucky enough to have individuals on staff, including Kurt Sparadakis, who is our director of boat building, who has the skill set and has a large team of volunteers who, when necessary and when needed, if we needed to make or change something on a boat and like repair it, we can. And that's when we go through the whole steps of, is it conservation? Is it preservation? Is it reproduction? Those are all three very different activities or choices that we make with certain objects. And I would say boats are certainly the largest of ones that have that. But you want to?
I mean, it really just depends on the kind of object, and it depends on, I guess, observation of the object. You have to look for the weak points, what material what material that it is, the condition that it's in, and whether or not to use gloves or not.
And I mean, in the case, I think also to point out the section of the hull of the snow squall that we have a dedicated exhibit space for. That had been sitting at the bottom of the ocean for many, many years. And when it was taken out, decay is actively happening with that. The ocean does a really good job of actually creating an environment where things can stay intact. You find this all over the place with the finding of hulls or dugout canoes or things. It's like a environment that it gets used to, and it sort of,
and once you take it out
in stone, and then take it out, and
the aging process starts
once again with like oxidization and things like that. So the snow squall is in our exhibit building. We actively monitor it, but we're not doing anything at the moment that would stop that active deterioration. It's a slow process, but it is happening, and it is just the reality of the situation. And that's where documentation comes in really, really handy, because if we can get good photos, we can get good descriptions, dimensions, all of that information in our catalog, then we have that information forever.
And see how that condition changes over time.
No, that makes so much. And I'm sure with the digitization of it too, you can also like visually like see any sort of differences that are made. Got it. It's all making sense.
It comes down to proper handling, proper storage, using of acid-free boxes and tissue paper and materials, doing everything that we can that creates a stable environment for the object that is not going to have a detrimental effect in any way. And sometimes we have to make choices when it comes to exhibits. So if you were here this summer, you would have saw the photography exhibit.
Yes, I did.
The women behind the lens. So that was an initiative of mine. And the reality is most of that work in our collection are glass plate negatives. I can't put 50 glass plate negatives out for display. That's not possible. So what did we do? We decided that we would reproduce them. So we scanned them, and then we tried to make sure that we didn't Photoshop them to an extent that wasn't what at least we were anticipating was the authentic sort of initial point, and then blew them up. So they're not to scale. That's a curatorial choice that we made, so that folks could actually get up close to the images and begin to pick out individual pieces.
I remember that exhibit because there are they were huge images, some of them were, but I as someone who went through and visited it, I do remember appreciating being able to see even the smallest of details in the background that of a normal picture you wouldn't see otherwise.
Right, exactly. So
good job.
So yeah, I mean, so you have to make choices, and similarly when it comes to light exposure. Sorry, Selena, I'm stepping on her foot. We have to be careful. You think about textiles. Textiles are it's really important to limit light exposure to. Similarly with prints that have a delicate surface, so or a graphite drawing, those unfortunately can begin to fade over time. So you want to just be careful in that regard, of making sure you're kind of monitoring it. And that's where constant condition checks, constant kind of eyes on pieces, especially they're up in the galleries, are really important.
Yeah, I regularly go up to the gallery, especially into the women behind the lens, and just go check out the camera every so often.
There's we have.
Yes, I remember it was all on a stand, right by that wall. I remember.
So we have one of the women photographers' cameras on display, and we have it set up as if it was going to go and shoot, the photo.
The photos in front of it.
And so it's it's balancing on a tripod. So it's original tripod that's from 1898.
Wow.
We are, we were making regular checks on it. But we wouldn't have put it in the exhibit the way we did unless we felt confident that it was secure.
Yeah. Right. Of course. Yeah. Catherine, you spoke for a second about making choices about things, and that kind of brings me to a different little subject of, with all of the artifacts that you guys have. I saw on the website there's tens of thousands of things that you guys have. Like you said, 5% of your museum is actually on display. And you spoke a little bit about it with what you choose to accession and what you do not choose to accession. How difficult do you find it to accept new items, or are you finding yourself able to, if it's not for you, you can find it a different home, or are people just kind of giving you things that are not necessarily what you're needing?
Yeah, I mean, it runs the gamut. I think all of those situations happen. In the year and a half or so that I've been here at the institution, I've seen a number of things come in. And some of them have been really, really awesome, either by donation or we have sought them out, via auction or a kind of a private sale. And the reality is, I look at them kind of first off as thinking, okay, is it exhibitable? Because at the end of the day, that's what we want.
Yeah.
But that's not the sole purpose of our collection. We are collecting, for future generations. And so we want to think about the scholars or the descendants of a family member who might come in and want to explore their family history, or the PhD student who's writing their dissertation. You never quite know what the value is going to be to somebody, and it is hard to be part of the group that makes those decisions, because some of them are does it really fit the mission?
We already have
a bunch of it? What does it add? But how could it be used? And so those are all conversations that we are constantly having within the acquisition committee, to think about, not only us right now, but us in 50 years as an institution. So yeah, it can be hard, but I certainly look at it as a lens of, is it exhibitable? Is it something that could go in an upcoming show? Like that's the best case
Yeah.
scenario. That doesn't always happen, because that's just the reality of the situation. So yeah, it comes and goes,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's like, thank you very much, but we're not the right home.
Hmm.
And in those cases, we try our best to identify um, other institutions or other organizations that could be a really good
Yeah.
home. I think of an example. We had somebody recently um, contact us about a compass that had history related to a known captain in the Rockland area.
Oh.
And we have a ton of compasses. So it wasn't necessarily
Yeah.
filling a hole or adding a new lens in a sense. So we said, you know what? The Historical Society up at Rockland, this could be a really cool piece for them.
Yeah.
And so we try to make those connections and
Hmm.
have, the Maine museum world is small. A lot of us know each other. So, it's kind of a you help me, I help you.
Yeah.
We all work perfectly
It's
together.
like a big
What
community.
was a song?
You were quoting Barney.
No White Gloves and Barney. That's the title of this episode.
Oops. I'm a millennial. What can I say? You're welcome.
Oh,
So in all seriousness, yeah, it can be
Yeah.
hard. But I try to think. I bring, a set of knowledge and a lens of how I'm looking at something. My other colleagues do as well. But if we have questions about something, that's also when we speak out
Yeah.
and reach out to other individuals who have knowledge bases.
Mhm.
I think something that has helped me in this field and in my career is I know what I know, but I also know what I don't know. And
Yeah.
so it's really important that I recognize when I
Hmm.
don't know something, that I then seek out people who can help me understand it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. I definitely considering like things of having to choose what to keep, what not to keep. I don't think I could do that because even just cleaning out my grandparents' house has
yep.
been the worst problem because I have no room in my apartment for anything. However, I absolutely have all of their chinaware in my closet right now because I can't bear to get rid of it. But so I can imagine how difficult that really is to try and assess what could be useful, what could not be useful. Um, I think we've kind of touched on a couple other questions, so I'm just going to skip forward a little bit, if that's okay. You knocked out my question about Barney and the White Gloves already, so I just got to keep going. Um, okay, so as far as interpretation goes, how do you feel that the Maine Maritime Museum approaches interpreting Maine's culture through its collections? Obviously, Maine is very proud of its maritime history, and so doing that, I'm sure you have to be cautious and careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that has been really interesting for me as somebody who is not a trained maritime historian,
Mm,
because there certainly are those folks, and we have a history of those folks working at the institution.
Mhm.
Everything kind of comes back and relates to maritime.
yeah.
It really truly does. And I will admit that even when I started here, or when I knew I was going to take this job, I was like, what am I going to do about maritime history? Like, how am I going to do this? Like,
Same.
I'm going to figure this out. But, and then you start thinking about it and you're like, well, it all connects. And,
Yeah.
we're here as, settler colonialists because people came on
Right.
vessels to what is now called Maine,
Yeah.
and also our indigenous population, the Wabanaki and the tribes that encompasses, they were traveling by water, using the water. The water is part of, it
Mm,
has like soul and is part of them. So water is integral to Maine's development, not only just based off of,
Yeah.
the schooners and the fisheries and all of that, but how do goods, how did goods get here? How do goods still get here?
yeah.
The reality is a lot still come in on the cargo ships and containers and things like that. So it's been cool, and we're at a really unique point within the institution where I think we're thinking a little bit more broad. What maritime means. We recently went through a mission change, and so our mission as an organization is now to connect people to the past, present, and future of Maine's waterways and their global reach. And so thinking, not just about the ocean, but also thinking about the waterways along the interior part of the state. We as an institution sit on the Kennebec. It is tidal through here because it connects to the ocean, but it also runs all the way up our state to, the Great Moosehead Lake.
Right.
And so, how did some of the lumber get down to the coastline to build these great vessels?
Yeah.
Aim down log drives. So it all comes and it all connects. And that has been a real eye-opening experience to me. And and a way to really think about new stories that we're telling. We're also trying to better understand what is Maine's role in slavery and the slave economy. And the reality is Maine played a giant role. We had vessels that were exclusively carrying cotton from the South to England and back. There's a great amount of wealth and power that was amassed by individuals who were directly tied to the chattel slavery economy. And so how do we tell that story? How do we make folks feel a little bit uncomfortable with their history? That's not an easy thing to do, but it is one that is necessary, and it's one that helps us be better at telling the complete story. How do we talk about Indigenous people, past, present, and future? They are still here. We are on their lands. How do we explain and work with them to tell their story? That's something I'm really passionate about, is making sure that, my voice as, a cis white woman is not the prevailing voice.
Right.
It shouldn't be. It's not all my history to tell. So what partnerships can we create? How can we work with community members to do that? But we're also then looking at environmental aspects. We're thinking about the Gulf of Maine warming faster than it's 95% of other bodies of water in the world.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. So that is something that is actively happening right now and actively affecting our communities on the coast. What happens when our state identity as the lobster state can't be anymore because the lobsters have migrated north because of warming waters? Those are discussions that we have to be having and have to be engaging our public with. So yeah.
And I mean, cataloging is very much the same. It's just uncovering new information. We find new things all the time, which can help benefit and help with interpretation of our exhibits. Yeah,
and finding things that we, didn't have any clue the history about, or finding ways that we can connect, more untold stories or uncovered history, or to be able to.
Yeah, like this week, we found a military cartridge pouch. Brand that we learned for a couple of years was actually run by a woman.
Right.
I love that. I love that.
So we're digging in things, and I think maritime history has changed a lot in recent years, and that's not to say that how it has been done was wrong or bad in any way. There is still a great emphasis on telling the stories of the vessels that were built at the number of shipyards in Maine that sailed all around the world, who were integral in getting, coal up and down the East Coast. And thinking of the Wyoming, the famed vessel that was built here on site at the Purseine Small shipyard. But there's also the people who worked on that. The crew of the Wyoming was predominantly Black. So what stories can we tell with that? We have active shipbuilding happening next door at Bath Iron Works. We can talk about organized labor and unions. unions have existed in Bath for years
Mm-hmm.
because we need worker protection. So there's all sorts of things that we can begin to dig into, and I'm really glad that the first project that I did here was a focus on women's history,
Yeah.
and thinking about, you know, they are they were active within maritime environments, within maritime industries, in fact,
Mhm.
as daughters and husbands of ship owners and granite cutters. Like they were part of it, but we've not really told their story.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going, and I feel really good about all of that.
Yeah. Honestly, I love that whole every single point that you touched on, because it really, I think, just shows the openness and freedom that you guys have to touch on so many different topics. And I feel like when people hear maritime history, maritime museum, they assume that it is extremely one-sided, very very narrowly like pigeonholed. And I think that deters a lot of people who are like, oh well, I don't like boats, so I'm not gonna do that.
Right.
But then I think it's a good reminder of like, even just of any museum, if you like hear a museum and you're like, this specific topic doesn't necessarily interest me, like history is fluid and it goes to every single aspect of life. And so just because one aspect doesn't necessarily interest you, like you can still find ways that you can relate and see yourself in the history that you're learning about. That's, whew, this is perfect.
And we're not getting, like, we will never get rid of boats.
Yeah.
One of our prized aspects of our museum is the Persean Small Shipyard.
Yeah.
We will always be telling that story because it is significant, it is important,
right,
and it's cool.
Yeah. It is really cool. I saw that while I was there.
But we can tell other things too. And I think that's what makes museums great, is that if you can touch on a variety of topics, that's what keeps your community engaged.
Yeah.
That's what keeps people coming back through your doors. And at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want people to engage with us. We want them to think that we are cool. There we go. Even if we don't say complete sentences. So yeah,
actually, you just brought up the literal perfect segue to the next question, which is asking, like, how do you guys collaborate? Like, what are the specific ways that you guys try and collaborate with your local communities to both, do those kind of visitor services of keeping them engaged, but also with specific to collections and curations? Like, how do you guys find your community kind of like interchangeably working together?
Yeah, I mean, we're dependent upon the community for acquisitions in a lot of cases. So that's a big one. People have stuff. We want their stuff at the end of the day. So, making them happy is obviously really important. But our education programs at all levels are really important. We introduced story time this fall to bring the little ones in. We have free admission for kids 17 and under. We run a really fantastic school program with our local school department called Sense of Place, which has variety of visits, both by museum staff to the school, but by the students to the museum. And they're at various different age or grade levels, learning about different topics. We have lectures and other programs.
And camp during the summer.
Oh, cool.
Different things to help do that. But then to speak kind of more to the exhibit side, we also are actively going out to the community. One of my big pushes since I've been here is to try and connect more with local artists and to bring their work to the museum so that we can be seen even more as a community space. And again, I like how you said history is fluid. Like history is now. So that means that work that individuals are doing now is history, and it can help shed light on things that happened in the past or what things that are going to happen in the future. So it's been a really big point of mine. Currently, it's coming to an end. There's a small show upstairs. We're in the basement, by the way. I guess that's why everything is upstairs to us. The work of Eric Darling, who is a rope artist, and actually show and tell time.
Yay!
So he takes what's known as
wow
scrap which is the rope that lobstermen use to like haul up traps and everything.
Yeah.
He salvages it, and I'm in the frame, and then creates these really cool, like somewhat three-dimensional pieces. And so this
Yeah.
is a small one. There's one in the gallery that's 5 feet by 3 feet, so that's massive.
Yeah.
But he is thinking about ways that he's trying to take this out of landfills
Mm-hmm.
and repurpose it into an artistic medium, which is just super cool. So I try to find people like these who are doing very interesting but also impactful
Yeah,
work.
super important work.
Exactly. And so, I'm lining up a few more local artists for next year in our small gallery space. I'm working with a sound artist for one of our big temporary special exhibits for next year. I think it's really important that those voices come through in our museum.
Yeah.
And because I think there is a lot of times, people look at museums and think, oh, they're just old and crusty. Some are. It's true. But yeah, right. And so, or they see a singular voice.
Yeah.
And something that I am really conscious of as a curator is I want to make sure that my voice is not the sole voice that somebody comes in and hears when they come to this museum. Because again, I know some things, but I know a whole lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And so I should not be the authority. And the reality is people see museums as authorities of truth.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can bring other voices in, like Eric, and talk about environmentalism and recycling and reducing our plastic waste.
Yeah.
Also, if I can bring in a sound artist who's going to make us critically think about the way our environment is changing in terms of sound.
Mm-hmm.
If I can bring in, an artist collective who's going to tell us about the changing Gulf of Maine. Those are all really great opportunities that not only build relationships for us, but help build confidence for, our public when tackling, in some cases, difficult or challenging topics, which includes climate change.
Yeah.
Shouldn't, but it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
No, that's perfect. 100%. And like, I'm also, I teach middle schoolers. So finding different ways to like engage people, and especially with you guys representing like a community of like finding ways where people can see themselves in that community too. Like that's really, really cool. And you had kind of talked about it just a little bit, but if there are any others, I would love to hear about them. But are there any like upcoming projects or initiatives that you guys are like specifically excited about for like showcasing some of Maine's like culture?
I mean, we're in a few weeks.
Yeah.
In a few weeks, we are going to be opening a second edition of our featured finds, which is my project, my Institute for Library and Museum Services grant project that I'm working on, just showcasing the different objects that we have found throughout the project.
Yeah.
Or not, but we've uncovered new information that was previously unknown. And we've just been having a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's again an opportunity. People love behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
So to show the work that Selena and our colleague Marilyn have been doing over the last 2 years, to show the importance of digitization and documentation. Like all of that is really important, and this is an opportunity to make that shine. I think in a way that people don't normally get. They might somewhat understand that going through a regular exhibit, like. Of course, the museum needs to know what it has.
Right.
But what does that process actually look like? And this second iteration of that, kind of the second or another celebration of the project as its second year comes to a close, is really exciting. So there's that. And then, I have 2 big projects on the docket. So my 2024 is going to be very busy.
Okay.
I mentioned a second ago, I'm working with a local sound artist. Her name is Diane Ballin, and we're creating an exhibit together titled Lost and Found Sounds of the Maine Coast by Diane Ballin. And it's an opportunity to think about how we experience our environment through sound, and how has that changed? How does changes in sound or lack of sound affect our memory our sense of place, our positioning kind of in an
That's
environment.
so interesting.
And then and then we also sounded objects in our collection that haven't sounded in
Oh my gosh,
decades.
that's so fun.
So I got to press handles and toot some horns essentially.
It was a great day.
Yeah, pretty. And so we're actually finding those sounds again. So that's kind of the hint to the name. And this is a new endeavor for us. We've never really done a sound exhibit in this way. And I think it'll be new for our members and visitors to think for a second, and instead of rely visually on information, sit back and think auditorily about what they're experiencing. So
that's so fun.
So yeah, that opens in February. So I am staring down the barrel of that one a little bit. And then in April, I have another exhibition opening. This one's the one that is very near and dear to my heart, as it is extension of research from graduate school, but it is titled Up to Camp, and it will be exploring camp culture. So thinking about the ways that both Mainers and visitors to our state experience the wilderness and the outdoors through camps. And all of the activities that come with that. So, again, with the source of the Kennebec being Moosehead Lake, this is an opportunity for the first time really to dive deeper into the history of our inland waterways and how significant they have played in growing this particular aspect of tourism. And I think I was looking at some statistics yesterday about even today in 2023, outdoor tourism is one of the fastest growing sectors within within the tourism industry in Maine. I think COVID really helped propel that. People wanted to get outside. And so that has certainly helped, but it's gonna be a really great and sort of visual explosion, I keep saying.
I'm so excited.
All the good camp stuff.
That's so I'm not from Maine originally. I'm from Minnesota, but being in Maine, I feel like that was a phrase that I did not ever hear before, but people were so flabbergasted when I did not know what they meant, because I would ask, like, what are you doing this weekend? And there was like, oh, we're going up to camp. And I'm like, camp? Like, what is that? Do you own a camp? Is it like a summer camp? Like, what do you mean? And it was just like, it's like every single person here, it's like they have like the place that they live, but then they have their escape, and like, oh, that's so fun.
Yeah. So yeah, it's gonna be real cool. And I think that there's a really cool contrast between those two temporary exhibits. So yeah. And then I also want to just throw out too, we're going to help celebrate the 30th anniversary of the really unique and wonderful sister city relationship that we have with Suguru, Japan. That we're going to celebrate this year through a couple of different small exhibits. It stems from the unfortunate wreck of the Chesbrook, which was a vessel built here in Bath through the Sewell Yard. And there's an incredible story of it wrecked off the coast of Japan, and some villagers ended up saving a handful of crew and passengers on the vessel.
Wow.
And so it created this really wonderful relationship between the village, which has now been encompassed by the town or city of Suguru, in the state of Amori. And so there has been this beautiful relationship built out of that. So we're going to celebrate the 30th anniversary of that through some cool art exhibits in our small.
Cool.
So, yeah, I mean, I have an example. So yeah, we're going to look at Gotaku, which is, I'm trying to, okay.
It's all backwards.
But
wow.
Fish prints. So these are fish prints that are made with actual fish. This is a traditional Japanese practice. So
that's crazy.
Working with a local artist on that one to demonstrate that practice. Looking at both fish from Japan and fish from Maine, which is going to be really cool. And then we're going to highlight this really awesome print exchange that happens with the Friends of Amori group that's established here in Maine. And it's haven't fully settled on whether or not it's going to be more of professional artists where work from Japan is brought to America and Maine, and work from Mainers is then brought to Japan, or if it's going to be some of the children's work. So I know it might be a little bit of both because I really kind of want both. So yeah, I mean, so that's just on the exhibit realm. Obviously, we continue to work with digitization,
right,
and all of that. Yeah. So I mean, never a dull moment. I always like to tell people
we're always doing
something.
No, that's so, oh my gosh, that's so exciting, and also gives me so many things to do in 2024.
True, yeah, exactly.
That's so awesome. Well, that's all I have for you guys. This was such a, oh my gosh, I'm like honestly kind of speechless, but this was so perfect. Thank you guys so much for doing this, for taking time out of your day, and for just kind of like, I feel like you guys just kind of like opened your hearts a little bit on this. It was great. Yes, so if you're listening, please definitely check out any links that were mentioned in the episode will be linked in any of the descriptions. So please definitely also check out the Maine Maritime website. They've got a lot of good stuff on there, a lot of artifacts and things to look at, as well as their upcoming list of things that's happening. So definitely check those out. And listen to my next episode, please. And thank you. And that's it. So we'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.